If you enjoy soft-spoken whispers and immersive ASMR stories that crawl into your mind like shadows in the woods, then this tale from Devil's Backbone is exactly what you've been dreading. Listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I should have never returned to Devil's Backbone, but the letter I got from my brother was written in his handwriting, with the exact way he used to sign my name on birthday cards when we were kids. And even though he'd been declared missing 2 years ago, I knew the loops in his Y and the tiny smudge of ink he always left on the lower left corner of the page. When he'd hold the pen wrong out of habit, and something about the way it read didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a baited, tried everything to accept that Brian was gone, and that his last hike up the Devil's Backbone Ridge was his final mistake. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there wasn't letting go of him, or maybe wasn't letting him go. And the park rangers had given up their search after 3 weeks when they found his shredded pack dangling from a pine tree. Like something had picked it clean and hung it up like a trophy. No signs of an animal attack, they said. No blood, no tracks, and no answers. Just the wind howling harder every night, as if the forest was mourning or warning so. When I packed my own bag and drove 12 hours back to the trailhead, I could feel the air shift before I even stepped out of the car. Like something heavy was sitting over the mountains, watching the parking lot and waiting for me to open the door. The ranger booth was empty, though the sign still read, "Welcome to Devil's Backbone National Wilderness," in chipped red paint. And there was a fog hanging unnaturally low across the wooden trail markers that bled into the thickets. Beyond, I kept the letter folded tight in my jacket pocket. The paper felt colder than it should have, and I remember rereading the last line again before. "I've stepped onto the trail, don't follow my voice." That was all it said under the map coordinates. And yet the moment I passed the first bend in the path, I swear to you, I heard him call my name from the trees, soft and distant, like it had traveled through water or smoke. Danny, the same way he used to say it when he wanted me to come see something crazy, like a snakeskin or a two-headed toad we once found when we were 12, and stupid and invincibly didn't turn toward it. But my feet froze anyway, and the hair on my arms rose like someone had breathed right against my neck. I told myself it was the wind, but the wind doesn't know your name. The first day hiking felt strangely easy. No wildlife, no birds, no deer, not even the usual buzz of insects that hang in the air like static in most forests. Just silence and wind, and the faint crunch of my boots on gravel that felt like walking through a graveyard with no headstones. I made camp just past the old Firewatch cabin, which had long since collapsed into itself and looked more like a skeleton than a shelter. The sky was darkening fast, and the clouds above moved too slow to be natural, like the wind down here wasn't touching them anymore. I cooked without lighting a fire. I couldn't explain why, but I didn't want to draw attention. Not from animals, not from people, not from whatever it was that seemed to be pacing behind the trees where the flashlight couldn't reach. Kept hearing the sound of something walking in loops just outside the beam. pausing when I aimed toward it, and then continuing again like it knew my fear was louder than any scream. I'd let out by midnight. I gave up on sleep and just sat there, letter in hand, rereading Brian's words over and over until I heard it again, Danny. This time closer and coming from two directions at once, one ahead and one behind, like echoes, splitting apart and then merging into my ears as if the forest was learning how to copy me more accurately. Stayed frozen and didn't answer, but the tent zipper began to twitch like fingers were pulling it inch by inch until I grabbed the blade I kept strapped to my boot and whispered something I didn't know I remembered from a prayer my grandmother used to say when we were little and sick and scared. The zipper stopped by. Morning, there were no tracks outside, and the fog had crept in closer, hugging the base of the trees and pouring over the path like smoke in a haunted theater. The birds were still gone, and I realized I hadn't seen the sun at all since. I arrived just a pale light from above that cast no warmth and no shadows. I pressed deeper into the trail past the switchbacks that had once led to the overlook, but now led to something else entirely. Because when I got there, the cliff was gone, not collapsed or washed out. Just gone, replaced by more trees that shouldn't have been there, and sky that bent in a way that felt wrong, like a painting viewed from the inside. There was a tree with something carved into it. At the center of this new growth, a crude drawing of a face, with no mouth, and underneath it, a message in shaky marks. Don't talk to the wind. I felt sick and turned around, only to find the trail behind me warped and unrecognizable. The stones I'd stepped on were now roots, and the air had changed to something thicker, like breathing through wet cotton, and the trees were closer now. Their trunks bent slightly inward, like they'd leaned in to watch irony. Don't know how long, maybe minutes, maybe hours, but when I stopped, my hands were bleeding from clawing at branches, and my compass needle was spinning in circles. Even when I stood still, the letter had fallen from my pocket, and I didn't even notice until I found it nailed to a tree 30 feet ahead, pinned through with a bow knot, a sticker, bow knife. Didn't touch IT camped again that night, not because I wanted to, but because the sun never came, and I was losing time. With every step I took, I wrote down the hours on my arm with a marker, just to track how long it felt between light and dark, but the numbers stopped making sense after a while. That night, I heard more voices, not just Brian's, but others, some whispering my name, others asking me questions, in voices I knew were dead or wrong, like they were trying to sound familiar, but had never really heard a person speak there. Said things like, "Why did you leave him here? Do you want to see what's left of him? He still calls for you, you know." And then just the sound of sobbing, like a child had been left alone in the trees and was crying into Mossa. Pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound was inside, now not around meat. Some point I fell asleep, or blacked out, I don't know, but when I woke, I was surrounded by a perfect circle of stones, with small items placed at each point, like an offering or a ritual. Each item was from my childhood, my broken slingshot picture of us at Yellowstone Mom's old locket with the crack through the glass. None of those things should have been here. None of them were in my pack, and yet they were old, and dirty, like they'd been here for years. Then I saw him, Brian, standing just outside the circle, pale and tall, and smiling with teeth too small for his mouth, his arms too long, and his eyes too flat, like they'd been painted on. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, and then I remembered the face carved in the tree. No mouth, no voice. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just closed my eyes and prayed again. And when I opened them, he was gone, but the items remained. This place remembers everything you forget, and forgets everything you remember. I don't know how much further I have to go, but I know this. Now the trail doesn't lead out, it leads in. I kept walking because standing still felt worse than moving, and every part of me knew that if I stayed too long in any one place, the forest would begin to bury me in memories and pieces of my past that didn't belong to me anymore, or maybe never had. The path beneath my boots felt less like dirt and more like skin stretched over something breathing, and I had to stop myself from looking too closely, because once I noticed the pulse, I knew I'd never forget it, and I didn't want to know what was pumping beneath the earth. There was a shape in the fog ahead, not moving but not still either, like it was waiting for me to see it before it decided what to become. I raised my flashlight, but the beam hit nothing, and then something. Press, and then nothing. Again, like it passed through layers of existence, stitched over one another with thread made of sound and grief. Tree appeared where the shape had been, but the bark was smooth and pale like bone, and carved into its base were dozens. 5 names, some scratched deep and angry, others soft and sad, and mine was there too, already etched before I ever arrived. Dye tried to rub it off, but the wood bled dark and thick, and the name just sank deeper, as if acknowledging that it now owned a part of me. Kept moving downhill, though the incline didn't feel right anymore, like I was descending through something rather than walking across it. The trees got denser, and the light got thinner, and I began to smell something sweet and rotten, like fruit that had died. Smiling, I came to a clearing shaped like an eye, and in the center was a pond, so still it looked like glass. But when I knelt beside it, I saw that the reflection didn't match what was above me. The water, the sky was blood red, and the trees were black and leafless, and there was someone standing directly behind me. Though I was alone, I didn't turn around. I threw a rock into the water, and the ripples screamed, not loudly, but with a tone so high and sharp it made my teeth hurt. And the sound didn't stop when the ripples faded. It continued, humming like a tuning fork buried in my brain. I ran again, not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost understood, and the trail curved now in impossible geometry, looping back on itself and shifting underfoot, so that my footprints ahead were already behind me, and no matter how far I walked, the same broken branch kept appearing on the left. Something about this place wants you to accept it as your only world, wants you to forget that trails are meant to lead somewhere. Found a shack made of stone and antlers and sinew that shouldn't have lasted through one winter, let alone decades, and inside it was warm to warm and filled with the scent of sage. and blood and wet pinen. The walls were more faces, all without mouths, and each carved into pieces of wood or flesh or fabric that pulsed like it hated being stared at. And there was something pinned to the far wall with iron nails longer than my forearm. It looked like Brian, or what was left of the shape that used to be him, but stretched too thin, and with his eyes rolled upward, showing only the whites, like he'd seen too much, and chose to forget by force. He whispered something, even though he had no mouth, and I don't know how. I heard it, but the meaning bled directly into my thoughts, like ink in water. You're already inside. Now, I backed out and tripped over a pile of bones, and the moment my skin touched them, the forest shuddered like it had caught a shiver from my fear, and the wind rose with a howl that didn't pass, but stayed hovering in the air like it had shape and intent. I screamed, then not out loud, but inward into myself, and it echoed back louder, with other voices layered behind mine, ones I didn't recognize, and one I did. My mother, she was calling for me from a hallway that no longer existed, from a childhood I never finished, and her voice cracked like brittle paper, and I dropped to my knees. Because grief has gravity here, and it pulls harder than anything you've ever loved. I stayed there until the shadows grew long enough to curl around my arms like fingers, and I crawled forward, not up, not down, just deeper, like there was no direction left but descent. I crossed a threshold without doors, just 2 stones marked with symbols that changed when I blinked, and passed into a new part of the forest that smelled like ash and regret, and the trees were black and leafless, but weeping sap that hissed when it touched the ground. There were lanterns hung in the branches, glowing with cold fire that burned upside down, and each one whispered a word as I passed. Though the words didn't make sense on their own, they stacked in my mind, unrearranged, until I understood memory is a cage, and the key is forgetting. I reached another structure, not man-made, not natural, something in between, like the forest had grown a tumor, and this was the result. And inside it were beds and old backpacks and Polaroid pictures pinned to roots that grew along the ceiling, and all of them were of people on the trail, all smiling, all unaware of the eyes in the background. One photo showed me, but I had no face, just blank flesh and a shadow behind me that mirrored my posture perfectly. The whispering got louder as I took the photo down and turned it over, and there, written in perfect black ink, was a sentence I hadn't spoken in years. I deserved this. I don't remember writing it, but I knew it came from May through the picture into the fire. But the fire turned black and screamed, and then spat it back out, untouched and colder than ether. Wind outside was rising again, not blowing, but circling, like it was orbiting the structure, and pressing in from all sides. And I heard the voices again, louder, now unified like a choir of the damned, singing my name in harmony. Danny. Danny, Danny, pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop, and the walls began to breathe and bleed. And then I saw him again, Brian, but this time not dead, not broken, just standing there watching me, with a face that flickered like bad film, and a smile that said, I'm not your brother anymore. He didn't move, but I felt him closer every time I blinked, until finally he stood inches from my face and whispered again without lips, "You've been here longer than you think." And that broke something in me, because suddenly I couldn't remember when I arrived, or how old I was, or what month it was. Plur. And the letter in my pocket was gone, and in its place was a different one, written in my handwriting and signed with my name, but addressed to someone else. It said, "Don't come looking for me. I found the truth, and it has no face." I dropped it and screamed out a name that wasn't mine. And the forest answered in kind, and the shadows peeled from the walls and began to crawl toward me with limbs made of roots and nails and teeth. And I, Ronnie, ran without direction or time or breath until the trail disappeared and the world tilted, and I fell not down but inward into a space that was darker than the absence of light and filled with the sound of wind that had learned how to speak, said one thing again and again in every voice: "I ever loved, you're almost home." I don't know how long I fell, or if falling was even the right word, because the space I landed in didn't feel like gravity or time had meaning anymore. Just layers of air and shadow stitched together into a tunnel that breathed like a lung, with walls that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Or maybe I was pulsing with it instantly. Ground beneath me wasn't earth, it was soft and warm and throbbed like it hated the weight of me, like the forest itself wanted to push me out, but couldn't, because I had already become part of it, and the wind here was louder than anywhere else I'd ever been. But it wasn't outside, it was in my head, scraping and humming and echoing every word I'd ever whispered to myself. In fear I tried to stand. But the sky was beneath me now, and the trees were growing downward, and the light above twisted, like a screw driving deeper into the ground. And in that moment, I realized the trail hadn't ended. It had inverted, and I wasn't walking forward. I was descending into memory, or madness, or both shapes. Past me, in the fog, tall and gaunt, and draped in moss and antlers and bone, and they moved without steps as if they floated on memory, and when they looked at me I saw my reflection in their faces like their eyes were mirrors, and I was the only thing they could remember. I passed under an archway of roots that bent together into symbols I didn't understand, and behind it the forest opened into a place so quiet it hurt, and in the center was a tree older than anything I'd ever seen, wide as a house, and covered in faces carved into the bark, all of them silent, all of them weeping sap that smelled like grief and decay. One of the faces looked like mine, not just similar, but exact, down to the scar above my right eyebrow and the mole on my neck. And when I touched it, the tree shuddered, and a low moan echoed through the clearing, like the forest itself was mourning me before I was even dead-eye. Stepped back, and the roots beneath my feet opened like a mouth, and I fell again, but this time into a room that shouldn't exist. Not here, not anywhere. Right. Was my childhood bedroom exactly as I left it. The last time Brian and I spoke, after our father's funeral, the posters, the bedspread, the cracked closet mirror, even the smell of dust and old air conditioning. But the window showed not a yard or sky, but the trail and the dark things. Walking it and watching the house from all sides, sighed, turned, and saw Brian sitting on the edge of the bed, looking younger than he should, with his head tilted and his mouth still absent. just smooth skin where words should live, and in his hands he held a photo of us, the last one we ever took, the one I'd burned years ago in a fit of guilt and whiskey, and yet here it was untouched and cold. He handed it to me, and for a moment I forgot where I was, forgot what was real, forgot that this place eats memory and rewrites truth. And when I looked up again, he was gone, and the photo was blank. And the room began to rot from the corners inward. I ran through the door and into the trail again, but this time the trees were upside down, and the sky was black and pulsing, and the voices were louder and faster and closer, each one pressing against my skull like fingers trying to dig their way in. And I heard my name screamed from every direction, in every tone, happy, angry, sad, pleading, laughing, all of them wearing Brian's voice. Like a mask, then I saw the cabin knot, the fire watch, one but another, deeper and older and alive, with vines wrapped around it like veins, and a chimney that bled smoke, that smelled like hair and salt and regret. I stepped inside and found walls covered in skin, stretched taut and pinned at the corners with branches, sharpened into claws, and in the center of the floor a pit spiraled downward, and in its depths I saw every moment I'd ever doubted myself, every mistake, every loss, and at the bottom I saw myself staring up, eyes wide, mouth open, screaming without sound. The cabin spoke then, not with a voice, but with a feeling, and it asked me to choose to stay or to remember, and I didn't understand what that meant until I realized remembering meant leaving, and leaving meant forgetting everything that happened here, including Brian, including the truth, including myself, said no and. The wind howled in fury, and the forest screamed, and the shadows rushed me with limbs of bark and faces of those I had forgotten, and they grabbed me, pulled me, twisted me, stretched me, until my bones cracked and my eyes burned, and my voice joined theirs, and in that moment I understood. This place isn't a trail, it's a collection, a cabinet of those who wander too far into sorrow and never crawl back out. It doesn't want you, did it? Once you changed, I don't know how I got back, or if I ever really did, because I woke up 3 days later in my apartment covered in dirt and blood and pine needles, with no phone, no backpack, and the photo of Brian and me pinned to my chest, with a bone needle through the center. No one believed Menno. One even remembered Brian ever existed not. My mother not, our old friends not, the rangers, as if the forest had erased him completely, but left the memory rotting inside me like a parasite that whispers when I try to sleep. Sometimes at night I hear the wind scratch against my window, and it says my name in his voice, Danny, Danny, Danny. And I swear the trees outside are getting closer, and my trail boots are wet every morning, and my face in the mirror doesn't always blink when I do so. If you ever get a letter in familiar handwriting with no return addressing, not to follow the voice, don't go not, even for family, because the wind at Devil's Backbone remembers everything, and now so do I. They always told us never to follow the bells, and I used to think it was just another ghost story from the Appalachians. The kind kids whisper round campfires with shaking flashlights and overcooked marshmallows. But now that I'm here with blood on my socks and mud up to my knees, I can hear them again. And I know I'm not supposed to be a live black hollow. Trail isn't even on the new maps anymore. The signage was pulled down a decade ago after the 3 hikers vanished without a trace. And the only way to find the old trailhead now is through a gap in the rusted fence behind the ranger station, where the trees grow thicker than they should and the fog never fully lifts. Sai should have never come back here. But when you get a voicemail from someone who died 5 years ago, speaking in the same soft voice they used when they asked you to follow them through the woods, you start to wonder if maybe the dead don't stay buried, and maybe you left a part of yourself back there without knowing. The message was simple. My name repeated 3 times with the sound of distant chimes underneath. And then a click, but it was her voice. It was Alina. And I hadn't heard it since the day she went missing, and I swore I would never return to this cursed place. But here I am standing at the trailhead, with my flashlight flickering in broad daylight, and the wind pressing down harder than gravity, and every instinct in my body telling me to go home before the forest remembers who I am. First few miles of Black Hollow Trail feel almost normal. The path winds through dense hemlocks and oaks, and the light filters in gold and dappled. But there are no sounds, no birds, no bugs, just the rhythmic crunch of my boots and the faint metallic ringing that seems to follow at a distance, like someone dragging wind chimes through the underbrush. I pass an old mile marker, carved into a stump and etched with something deeper than time, and I realize it isn't just rot that makes the wood dark, it's blood, or something older than blood that seeped into the rings and made a home there. I keep walking because I have to, because if I turn around now, the trail will close behind me. I know it will. I've seen it happen before, and the forest does not like being disrespected by cowards. 3 hours in, and the fog begins to rise from the soil like steam from an open wound, and the trees grow too close together, their trunks twisted like bones, snapped and rehealed, wrong, and I see something carved into the bark of every 3rd tree, a symbol like a bell with something hanging beneath it, not a clapper, but an eye, and each one is more detailed than the last time. Try not to look directly at them, because every time I do, I hear something faint, like a voice I used to know, saying things I don't want to remember. And the longer I listen, the more the words twist into questions. I can't answer. Why did you leave me? Why didn't you stop me? Why are you still breathing? I camp near what used to be the old ranger lookout post, now collapsed into a pile of damp boards and rusted nails, and I don't light a fire because the darkness here doesn't like competition, and the air tastes like iron and mold. I eat cold jerky and stare at the map, which doesn't match what I've walked, and realize that the trail is longer now, that the forest is shifting, and that the lines drawn by man cannot contain something that was never meant to be walked. The distance, the bells begin to ring again, not loud but steady, like a heartbeat out of sync with my own, and I feel something watching me from the ridgeline, where the trees grow too thin and too tall and move even when there's no wind. I fall asleep with my boots on and my knife in my hand, and dream of Alina standing at the edge of the old quarry, her dress torn and her eyes bleeding shadow, and she says one thing before stepping backward into the dark queue. Left the door open, I wake to find my tent unzipped and the ground around me covered in small handprints, too small to be adult but too wide to be children, and my compass needle spinning like it's afraid of pointing at what's behind me. Don't pack, I just move forward, because forward is the only direction I have, and the fog gets thicker now, almost oily in texture, and with every mile I feel more of myself peeling away, like the forest is stripping me down to something simpler, something it can use. I reach the bell tree by accident, and when I see it, I understand why they tried to burn the trail off every map in the region. The trunk is wrapped in chains, and the chains are hung with bells of every shape and size. Old brass funeral chimes, rusted cowbells, delicate silver sleigh bells, and beneath, by them, 100 or more photographs stapled to the bark faces. Missing names, faces with eyes scratched out or mouths open in silent screams, and one of them is Elena. She's smiling in the photo, but her smile is wrong, stretched too wide, and her eyes are looking at something just outside the frame, and her fingers are pressed together like she's praying or hiding something between them. I reach out without meaning to, and the moment my skin touches the bark, every bell rings at once, not loud, but with a sound that shakes my ribs and turns the air to liquid, and I fall backward, gasping, as the forest roars around me and the fog clears. Just enough to show me the figures moving toward me through the trees. They wear no faces, only masks carved, plur from bark and bone, each one shaped like a bell with holes where their eyes should be. And they move without sound, even the leaves refuse to crunch under them, and their hands hang limp, as if unused. They stop 10 feet away and raise their heads in unison, and from the trees above, dozens of smaller bells begin to chime, each one pulsing in rhythm with my heart. And then they speak not in words, but in memory. I feel Elena's hand in mine on the night she told me she was going into the woods to find the source of the bells. I feel her breath against my cheek as she whispered that the trail doesn't take everyone, only those who are already hollow. And I remember not stopping her, not believing her, not going after her until the snow came. And it was too late. The figures turn and vanish into the trees, but I know they're not gone. And now the bells ring slower, deeper, as if marking time or measuring how much of me is left to take. Don't know how far I walk after that, only that the sky never changes and the air never warms, and every breath tastes like ash and copper, and the ground begins to hum beneath my steps, like something huge is stirring beneath the roots. I reach a clearing with stones arranged in a circle, and at its center is a hole not wide but deep, impossibly deep, and from within it the sound of bells rises, constant, unchanging, as if the hole itself is breathing music. And I realize the trees are bowing toward it, and that the fog is not natural but rising, be from its mouth like incense from an altar, Then I hear her again, Elena, calling my name from within the hole, not scared, not pleading, but inviting. And her voice is clear now, no static, no distortion, just her soft laugh, and the way she used to say my name when I made her coffee to Stromand. Against every instinct, against every scream in my spine, I take one step forward and then another. The sound coming from the hole was louder now, not in volume but in presence. Like it wasn't just ringing but remembering. Like the bells were alive, and each one held a memory that belonged to me, or maybe to someone I'd forgotten. And as I stepped closer, the air grew thick and sweet with rot like old flowers on a grave. Hole wasn't a hole, not really. It was a throat wide and dark and breathing, and I could feel it inhale each time. I exhaled as if the forest had found a way to mimic my breath, to sync with me, to pull me into its rhythm so I wouldn't notice when my pulse started matching the bell's eye. Leaned over the edge, and the fog parted just enough to show me the impossible steps, spiraling downward, carved into the dirt and bone, and slick with something wet and old. And I could hear my name again from the bottom, not screamed, not whispered, just spoken gently, like a lullaby meant to make me forget I ever belonged anywhere else. Sigh stepped down because I didn't have a choice, because the trail was gone now, and the forest behind me had folded shut like a book that never wanted to be opened again, and every step down felt longer than the last, like the stairs were stretching as I moved, like time was dilating. Proud my decision, and I started to smell things that weren't there, or maybe always had been cinnamon and blood cedar and burned. Her my childhood bedroom Elena's perfume. I kept going because there was nothing else, because the bells had called me, because I had followed, and now the only way out was through, and the deeper I went, the louder they got, and I could feel the metal vibrating in my teeth and my bones, until every step sang a song. I didn't want to understand. The walls closed, bend around me, and began to pulse like lungs, and I had to crouch and then crawl, and the darkness pressed against my eyes, like a blindfold soaked in ink, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moss growing in veins along the wall's veins. But that throbbed in rhythm with the bells and with me, and then I saw them, hands reaching from the walls, not attached to bodies, just arms buried in earth and rock, some skeletal, some fresh, some twitching with life they should not have, and one of them gripped my ankle tight, and I screamed without sound as pain flooded my leg like electricity, but I didn't stop. I kicked and it let go, and the hand retreated as if shamed. I don't know how long I crawled. I don't know if time exists in the throat of the forest, but eventually the tunnel opened into a cavern so wide and high it felt like I had fallen into the chest of the earth, and the ceiling above was filled with bells hanging from roots, like strange fruit, each one swaying gently though. There was no wind in. The center was an altar made of broken bones and rusted metal, and stretched across it was a figure too long and too thin, with skin like bark and a face covered by a mask shaped like a bellend. Around the altar were others kneeling, some with masks, some without, but none moving, none breathing, just frozen in that moment like statues caught mid-prayer. and I knew without knowing that every one of them had once been a hiker like me, called by the same voice, lured by the same memories. Lost in the same fog, the figure on the altar sat up slowly, joints cracking like old wood, and turned its head toward me, and even though it wore no eyes, I knew it was seeing me, and I felt something inside me shift, like a door unlocking without my permission, and it spoke not aloud, but directly into my thoughts. You should not have come, but now that you are here, you must remember. And suddenly, I was back at the edge of the quarry with Alina laughing, and the sun just starting to set, and she, the wise, holding something in her hand, a small silver bell with strange etchings on its surface. And she said it was a gift from the trail, something she found tied to a branch. And when she rang it, everything changed. The sky darkened, the air froze, the birds stopped, and we heard them for the first time. The voices in the trees, the bells beneath the earth. The forest had seen her, and it wanted her, and she stepped forward. Not out of fear, but out of love, and I didn't stop her. I just stood there and let her go. And when I tried to follow the next day, the trail had vanished. Now it was letting me remember, so it could punish me for forgetting. The figure on the altar raised one hand and pointed to the wall behind it, and there, carved into the stone, was a mural of me, every year of my life, every face I had worn, every mistake I had made, etched in perfect detail, and beneath it my name written again and again in blood and ash and barked. The others began to stir, slowly rising to their feet. Masks, creaking limbs, trembling like marionettes cut from string, and they formed a circle around me, each one raising a bell and letting it ring, and the sound filled the cavern with pressure and light and sorrow. And I dropped to my knees as the figure approached and placed a bell in my hand, which Ursula's belly knew it. By the scratches, by the ribbon, by the faint scent of her still clinging to the metal, and I understood then what it wanted from me. Choice to forget her, and be free, to keep her, and stay closed. My fingers around the bell, and the cavern screamed. The sound that came from the bell wasn't a chime or a ring. It was a scream that only memory could hear, a scream that echoed inside the marrow of my bones, and every figure around me fell silent, frozen in reverence or terror as I clutched it tight and felt the cold of it spread through my skin, into my blood, into my thoughts. The masked figure stopped inches from me and lowered itself until our foreheads almost touched, and I could hear the grinding sound of its breath like wind being forced through teeth, and it spoke again in that same ancient voice that bypassed sound and lived directly in my mind. You have chosen the weight not, the mercy will not be taken, you will be held, and with that it reached out and touched my chest with a finger longer than my forearm, and the bell in my hand began to melt, not with heat, but with grief, and as it dripped into my palm, it hardened into bark, into moss, into something ancient and alive, and it grew over my wrist, my arm, my shoulder, put it until I was covered in it, cocooned in a living echo-wound. Then the forest began to pull. I wasn't lifted or dragged. I was absorbed, drawn into the ground, into the roots, into the bell itself, and I felt myself stretched thin through time, through the memories of the forest, through every step, every breath, every death that had ever happened on the trail. And I understood then why the bells rang. They weren't just calls. They were recording seekers of sorrow songs, of unfinished endings each bell held. A soul trapped in the moment of its last thought, and now I was one of them. Not dead, not alive, just suspended in a scream that would never fade. And I saw Alina. Again, not as a ghost, but as a bell. A perfect silver shell, nestled in the roots of a tree, swaying gently in the windless dark. And she turned to me and smiled and mouthed the words I had waited so long to hear. You found me. And then I was back on the trail, something like if the sun was rising, or maybe falling. The sky was colorless. The trees were hollow, and the air was thin like paper, and the path before me twisted in ways that didn't follow the rules of nature or reason, and every step I took echoed with bells. Even though nothing moved, I walked because I didn't know how to stop, because the trail would not end and I would not rest. And the only thing that reminded me I had ever been human was the weight of the bell fused to my arm. The one that no longer rang but hummed like a forgotten name in a crowded room. Sometimes pass others on the trail, their eyes blank, their mouths open in silent songs, and we never speak because we can't, because speech belongs to the living, and we are something else. Now something older than language and softer than silence. The trail leads nowhere, but it also leads everywhere. Every time someone walks black, hollow, and hears the bell, it's because one of us remembered just long enough to cry out, and that cry twists the fog and opens the way. And if they listen, if they follow, then they join us, and if they don't, the trail forgets them and sends them back with nothing but an ache behind the eyes and a fear of sleeping near Trizzy. Watch them come sometimes from the cracks in the bark or the shadows under the rocks. I see the way they hesitate at the sound of the bell. I see the way their memories surface, the ones they buried, the ones they lost. And I feel the hunger of the forest pulse around me with delight, because it is not evil, it is not cruel, it simply needs to be remembered, and memory requires sacrifice. The last time I felt sunlight was not real. It was something the forest gave me to keep me quiet, a moment of warmth so I would stop clawing at the dark, and I took it gladly, because even the illusion of peace is better than the truth of eternity. Now I wait not for escape, but for Hertha, real Alane, the part of her that's still human, because I believe she's still out there somewhere. Her soul split the way mine was, part lost, part buried, part waiting. And when she finds her way back to the trail, when she hears the bell, when she steps into the fog, I will be there, and I will remember her Amond for one brief moment before the forest takes her to we will be whole again, and the bells will sing. The forest will be fed, and the trail will grow just a little longer. So if you ever hear a bell in the woodstone, follow it, because it's not calling for help, it's calling for you.